The other thing you need to make sure of is that if you do buy one of these policies, that you can afford the policy for the rest of your life until you use it. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to buy it for 5 or 10 years and pay into it and then end up canceling it, because that's just a complete waste of your money.
Are you ready for a successful retirement? We're addressing the topics facing today's retirees. Welcome to Retire with Ryan. Now here's your host, Ryan Morrissey.
Welcome back. This week we're going to be talking about long-term care, specifically the different ways that you can pay for long-term care should that become necessary for you at some point in your retirement, and also whether you should think about buying a long-term care policy before you retire. For a lot of people, long-term care is a sensitive subject. Some of us have had family members. I myself, my grandmother needed care for a number of years, and it wiped out a lot of her savings. You know, all of us hope that we don't need care and that we are the lucky few that don't, but unfortunately, a lot of us end up needing care. So let's talk first about what is long-term care. Well, long-term care is designed to help you take care of yourself, essentially, when you're not able to do so any longer. And this could be either as a result of cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's, dementia, or it could be more of physical debilitation where you're not able to perform what are known as the activities of daily living. There are 6 activities of daily living. They are eating, bathing, dressing, using the restroom, transferring, continence. And once you're not able to perform 2 of these 6 activities, that's usually when it's determined that you're in need of some type of care. And whereas skilled care could be something that results as if you had, let's say, an accident or a fall and you broke your hip, but after a certain period of time, it's determined that you should be able to take care of yourself. Well, then the skilled care would end, and that's where the long-term care would take place if you weren't able to take care of yourself. Unlike, medical or hospital care, long-term care is really not designed to help cure your medical condition. It's really to help you continue to maintain your standard of living. And this care could take place at your house. I know for myself, that's where I would hope to be. And for many of us, we'd like to stay in our homes as long as possible. But if that was no longer feasible, then this could take place in either a full-time nursing facility or maybe a daytime nursing facility. And who is going to need the care? Well, there's different studies out there that give you statistics on the percentage of people who are in need of care. And according to the government, the U.S. government has a long-term care website, longtermcare.acl.gov. I'll put the link in the show notes. About 70% of people who reach age 65 can expect to receive some form of long-term care during their lives. And as I mentioned before, about 90% of those people hope to receive care in a home or community setting. Also, this might surprise you, 42% of people in need of care are actually 64 years old and younger. That comes from a study that was done by Georgetown University. So a lot of us, might end up needing care, and it might be sooner than you think, unfortunately. So how much does it cost? Well, the cost really depends upon where you live, and that could vary greatly. I live in Connecticut. Connecticut is an expensive state to live in, and like most things in Connecticut, long-term care is also an expensive thing to receive in Connecticut. And on national level, the average of nursing homes, full-time nursing homes, range from about $80,000 to $90,000 a year. Assisted living facility is about $43,000 a year. And then a home health aide, if you are receiving care in your home, costs about $45,000 a year. That's on a national level. In Connecticut, the average Connecticut nursing home costs $151,000 a year. And that is based on numbers from last year. The average cost per day in Connecticut is $414 a day for long-term care. If you're curious as to what it costs in other states, on that same website I mentioned earlier, if you were to go in there and then click on costs and how to pay, there is a subsection titled how much the cost of care in your state. And that will then take you to another website, Genworth's website, which I'll also put a link in the show notes to, where you can actually look at a specific state and get an idea of these various costs. I can tell you that Connecticut is one of the higher cost states, and it is less costly to move into some of the southern states on the East Coast, and the cost of care is less in those states than it is in Connecticut. Sometimes it could be as much as half. So what has the cost been going up by? Well, I can only speak about Connecticut because I have that number, but since 1986, Connecticut has been tracking the cost of care in each nursing home. So they've been taking the cost of each nursing home and they've been averaging them together to come up with that daily amount. As I mentioned last year, it was $414 a day. But that cost has increased by an average rate of 5.1% per year. So it's gone up at a very rapid rate, probably higher than the cost of inflation. So what are the different ways that you can receive care? Well, let's talk about one of those first, and one of them is Medicare. Medicare will help pay for part of your long-term care costs, but not really. Medicare will only pay for short-term medical bills. So let's just say, I mentioned earlier, if you had a bad fall, you break your hip, Medicare will pay for the cost for you to stay in the hospital up until a certain point. And then once it's determined that you should be able to now care for yourself, Medicare will stop paying and you'll have to either return to your home or go to some type of nursing facility and receive care there. And then at that point, you'd have to find another way to pay for it. What about Medicaid? Well, Medicaid will pay for cost of care, but with Medicaid, you have to essentially go broke. So with Medicaid, it's based on your marital status as far as how much income and how much assets you can have to be able to qualify. As a single person, and this varies per state, but you have to have less than $1,600 in your name to qualify for Medicaid. So you'd have to sell your house, sell your car, spend down your assets, getting to $1,600, which is a very small amount of money. As a married couple, it depends on the state. In Connecticut, they actually will allow you to keep a certain amount of assets. I believe as of last year, it was roughly $118,000 of assets you could keep. You could keep a house up to a certain value. I think it's $750,000. And then there's a certain amount of monthly income that you can keep. So there's some more flexibility there if you're married as far as being able to get your spouse who's in need of care to qualify for Medicaid. But it is still a situation where you will need to have spent down your assets. Now, another option is that you could start gifting away assets. That is another subject and something I definitely always urge people to speak with an attorney to talk about gifting away assets, because anytime you're gifting away assets, the good thing is that you're getting them out of your name so that if you did need care, you maybe are more readily able to qualify for Medicaid. The negative is that you've taken assets out of your name and you've put them in someone else's name, a child, a grandchild. And now if it's not done properly, what you've potentially done is you've exposed your assets to a negative outcome for that individual, such as a divorce, a lawsuit, a bankruptcy. If they have a car accident and hurt someone, those assets will be attacked if they're not properly positioned. And that's where talking with an attorney, maybe setting up some type of trust, putting those assets into the trust can give you more protection than just gifting them outright. So I'd be very careful about gifting assets out of your name as a way to qualify for Medicaid. But with that, if you do gift assets, there's currently a 5-year look-back period. So what does that mean? That means if you gift assets out of your name, you'd have to make it past 5 years before you'd be able to go on Medicaid claim. If you made a Medicaid claim before 5 years, then you'd have those assets pulled back into your name, and now they would be counted for Medicaid. And what would happen is, if it was determined that the assets you gave away inside of the 5 years qualified you for 2 years of care, then you would not receive Medicaid for 2 years. So if you're going to gift the assets, make sure that not only, as I said before, you speak with an attorney who, goes over all the pros and cons of this with you, and you also make sure they're set aside and they're not spent or squandered, because if you now go on Medicaid or try to go on Medicaid and you actually don't have the money, you're really going to be in a bad position, because you're not only not going to qualify for Medicaid, but now you don't have any money to pay. So some of the other options are, one is obviously you could just plan to pay for it yourself. If you're in a situation where you have sizable assets and you've gone through your budget and figured out that if this did happen to you or your spouse, you'd be okay, that's certainly acceptable. That's one way that you could do it, right? You could pay for it. Even your family members can help you pay for it. Another option is you can purchase what's known as a combination life insurance long-term care policy. So these are our newer policies. And the reason they're more popular is one of the biggest fears that people have is, like most insurance, you pay for it and you never use it. And especially with long-term care insurance, because it is a costly thing. So rather than paying for something that you might not use, with the life insurance combination long-term care policy, you qualify to get the money back to you either as a long-term care benefit or as a life insurance benefit to your beneficiaries. So either way, it's coming back to you or your estate. And the way it would work is you determine the amount that you need. And let's just say you determine you needed $200,000 of long-term care insurance. You'd buy a policy that gave you $200,000 of death benefit. And you could either use the $200,000 for long-term care. If you didn't use it, then the whatever's left or whatever you didn't use goes to your beneficiaries as a death benefit. With these policies, generally you can take out a maximum of 4% of the death benefit per month. So if you took out the maximum, your policy could last 25 months. Now you can take out less than that, but that's how you could look at this. So $200,000 policy, 4% of that would be $8,000 a month, but it would only last 25 months if you took that maximum amount. The issue with this is because something is coming back to you, the insurance company is going to have to pay you something. It is more costly to buy this type of insurance than it would be just a traditional long-term care policy. But if you are concerned about that, then it is an option for you. And the last option, which is probably the most cost efficient, is buying a traditional long-term care policy. And the way that these work, these policies have many, many different options. The number of companies issuing them has shrunk because a lot of companies mispriced these policies, didn't sell enough of them, so they've had to either get completely out of the long-term care business, like a company like Prudential, or they've sold that business off to another company. But with these policies, and with any policy, I should say, the first thing you'd really need to determine is how much do you need. Now, I threw out some numbers earlier. One of those is how much the average nursing home costs in Connecticut. So let's just round that off to $400. Let's just say that is the number that you're going to use in today's dollars. But you have other income in retirement. Hopefully, if you've listened to my other podcast about setting up a retirement income strategy, you're going to have income coming in. And let's just say you have $8,000 a month coming in, then you're not going to need as much money to pay for long-term care because you have that $8,000 coming in. But if you didn't have $8,000, if you have less than that, then whatever the shortfall is in your budget, that's probably the amount that you should get a policy for. So if we determine the cost for you is $400 a day, which is $12,000 a month roughly, and you have $8,000 coming in, then you have a $4,000 a month shortfall if you were in need of a long-term care policy. So in that case, you maybe could get a small policy for only $140 a month. But you have to really look at this in the context of, if you're married, how your other spouse would be impacted. Because most likely if one spouse is in need of care, that remaining spouse is still going to have a lot of the same household bills. They're still going to have to pay the taxes, the insurance, the utility bills, food, other maintenance costs. So you could assume that maybe the living expenses for that spouse would go down a little bit, but not enough where you can use all of that money to pay for your care. So you'd really want to work out and figure out how much of a shortfall do you have, and then you'd want to look into buying a policy that covers you for that appropriate amount. Some of the other features with the policy is how long of a policy you're going to buy. And there's another statistic out there that says the average nursing home stay is 2.5 years. But usually that's preceded by a 1.5 year stay in home care. So it's about an average of 4 years that most people are in need of long-term care, combined between home care and full-time nursing care. So given that, you'd probably want to buy a policy that had at least 2 years of coverage. If you want to be more conservative, you can go for a policy that has 4 years of coverage. There used to be policies that you could buy that had an unlimited amount. Those were sold many years ago, but as I said before, insurance companies really not managing this properly. A lot of those policies have gone by the wayside. So you'd want to determine that, and then so the daily amount, the length of the policy, and then also if you're going to buy an inflation rider. As I mentioned earlier, the cost of inflation in Connecticut, and I'm sure this is true on a national level, has averaged about 5%. So do you want to purchase a 5% inflation rider? That is an option. The problem is that because interest rates have been low for a while, insurance companies aren't making the money that they had originally planned. So they're having to charge more for long-term care policies. And they're charging a lot more for policies that have a 5% inflation rider. So that might be an option, but maybe getting one with a lower inflation rider is more in your price range. Let's say a 3% inflation rider. Now, you can purchase no inflation rider, but I definitely wouldn't recommend that because we've seen, based on numbers over the years, the cost has been going up by quite a bit. So you don't want to buy something that is good today, but most likely when you need it, it's not very good because the cost has gone up and it's not buying what it used to. So when is the best time to think about buying a policy? Well, generally between age 60 and 65. And the reason is that at that point, you're getting closer to where it's probably realistic that you would actually trigger the policy. And also you're at a point where you're probably still in good health so that you're not going to be negatively impacted. And anytime you apply for long-term care insurance, there is an underwriting process. And what that involves is looking at your medical records and also going through a phone screen, a cognitive screening where the insurance company is making sure that you're still cognitively there. If you pass that, then, they'll give you the rate that's advertised. Or if there's other issues that creep up, the insurance company might charge you more than the original amount that you were quoted. So how much does it cost? Well, it depends on the daily amount that you're purchasing, the inflation rider that you're purchasing, the state that you're buying it in, your marital status, and also whether you're a male or a female. What I did was I attained some quotes, and I'll put a link to them in the show notes, for a female. The reason I chose a female is because the rates for females are more than males. So at least we have this as a baseline. But I attained a quote for assuming $250 a day of benefit for a 3-year period with a 3% compound inflation rider. And I looked at that at age 60. So at age 60, the quote would be $5,400 roughly per year. At age, if you waited until 65, it would be $6,700 a year. And if you waited until age 70, then it would be $8,400 a year. Now that's a preferred rate. That would be the best pricing that you could get. But if you had some health issues and maybe you got select, for a 60-year-old, it would be $6,400. For a 65-year-old, it's $7,800. And a 70-year-old female, it would be $9,900. So now you can see why the cost is so high. However, if you think about it, if you're getting 3 years at $250 a day, that's $274,000 of coverage that you have on day one of once you receive the policy. So that's why it is so expensive. And most of these illustrations the insurance companies would provide you would show you that it would only take about 6 months of collecting on the policy to get back everything that you had paid into it, even if you paid into it for, let's say, 20 years. Now, you might be thinking, well, I'll just wait and, the cost will be the same. Well, that may or may not be true. What's actually happened is insurance companies have raised the rates significantly for new buyers. They don't have to get any approval to do that. I will tell you that looking at these rates from 5 years ago, they were half, maybe even less than half of what they are now. So if this is something that you're seriously thinking about doing, there's no time like the present to actually go through the process and look at this, because I'll guarantee one thing: the rates are definitely going to be higher in the future, especially that interest rates aren't going anywhere and they're staying very low. That's going to put even more pressure on insurance companies to charge more for these policies. So what are your next steps? So if you're thinking about buying long-term care insurance, I would advocate finding an independent insurance agent to provide you with some quotes and discuss your medical history with that individual to find out right away if there are any situations that would disqualify you from applying altogether, because that is possible. If not, if it still makes sense for you to apply, then I would go through and apply and find out what the actual rate is that you'll get from the insurance company so that you can make a decision. Because until you do that, you really have no idea, what the insurance company is going to charge you. And once you've gone through this, if it makes sense, then great, go ahead and get the policy. If not, then at least you've decided whether or not this is something that you need to pursue. Because the other thing you need to make sure of is that if you do buy one of these policies, that you can afford the policy for the rest of your life until you use it. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to buy it for 5 or 10 years and pay into it and then end up canceling it, because that's just a complete waste of your money. So you need to make sure that if the premiums go up, which they will, that you can afford that. I mentioned earlier how it's harder for insurance companies to raise the premiums for existing policyholders because each state has an insurance department, insurance commissioner. And when an insurance company is going to raise their rates on existing policyholders, such as long-term care policyholders, they have to get state approval. And they generally do get the approval, but the company might ask for a 40% increase, but maybe the state only allows them a 20% increase. So there is a little bit of oversight there, whereas with a new policyholder, the company can just raise it to whatever the market will pay. So that is the benefit of you getting it. You do have a little more cushion there as far as the rates going higher. So I hope you found this beneficial. Last week's podcast was on life insurance and retirement. If you didn't listen to that, you should definitely take a listen. If you could provide some feedback through the app that you're listening to this on, that's always appreciated. If you could give us a rating, or if you have any other topics that you're interested in hearing on, please pass that along to us as well. You can learn about the services that I provide at retirewithryan.com, and I hope that you have a great week. Take care.
You should consult a financial advisor familiar with your specific circumstances before you make any financial decisions. Nothing in this broadcast constitutes a solicitation for the sale or purchase of any securities. Any mention of rates of return are historical or hypothetical in nature and are not a guarantee of future returns. Ryan Morrissey, CFP, is an investment advisor representative of Morrissey Wealth Management, LLC, a registered investment advisor.